CDC on this work, and it's just lovely to be reconnected and to know that she's kind of leading the work now in Connecticut. So yeah, I have some slides. My plan today was to talk to you for about half an hour, 35 minutes. I don't think anyone can stand a talk that goes longer than that on Zoom these days. And then hopefully we can have some time for a conversation, discussion. Would love also to hear more about the work you're doing. And maybe this can really be a dialogue instead of just me answering questions. I look forward to hearing more about your thoughts and ideas, especially as we're moving the work into the US. So I'm going to talk about, going to start with our work at global level, and then I'm going to bring it back to the US in terms of the work that we're doing right now that's really exciting around advancing this issue in the US. So I will be sharing slides, and hopefully the technology will help. So I'm going to try this. Okay. Let me just see. And then down here. Can you see my slides? Can I just get a thumbs up? Perfect. All right. So I am going to talk to you a little bit about, again, the work that we're doing globally, and then I'm going to bring it back to the US. And the focus will be on ending child sexual abuse. So first, let me tell you a little bit about Together for Girls. So we are a public-private partnership that's been around for over 10 years now. We celebrated our 10-year anniversary in 2019. So it's we're heading into our 11th year. And we were really started over a decade ago because some of the folks that were working on HIV and the HIV epidemic in sub-Saharan Africa were really aware of the fact that adolescent girls had much higher rates of HIV infection than boys. And it was at a time when the HIV pandemic was really exploding, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, with adolescent girls and young women. And we knew at the time I was working at the Department of State under the Obama administration. I can't remember, Jesse, if you were already at CDC when we started. Yeah, you were there. And really there was this sense of something else is going on beyond consensual sex that is clear, but we really have no sense of the magnitude of any kind of sexual violence that's happening. And so CDC really led the way in terms of kind of creating this population-based survey to look at violence against girls. And the focus was sexual violence, but also included emotional violence, physical violence. And the first place where it was implemented was a country in Southern Africa called Swaziland, now Eswatini, small little country surrounded by South Africa. It's like this little tiny country in the middle of South Africa. And the data, I mean, it was really this idea of getting public health and applying a public health lens to the issue of sexual violence. And people were blown away by the results. I mean, the level of violence that was happening in the lives of these girls and young women was just above and beyond what anyone imagined. And at that point, there was this sense of, okay, we can't just have all of this data. What are we going to do about it? So working closely and with the leadership of the national government, that's really important, really owned by the national government, several partners, including UN agencies, private sector organizations, and others, came together to say, well, there are many pieces to the puzzle. You know, this isn't an issue that can be solved by a single sector or act alone. So we have to come together, and Together for Girls was born. Since then, this survey has been repeated many times. I'll say more about that. But really, we've grown as a partnership. We have several civil society partners as well as national governments in over 22 countries. But let me tell you a little bit more about our model. So the model has stayed the same over the last decade. It's about data and advocacy to drive change, to drive action. And so really understanding that for many years, the issue of just sexual violence, including child sexual abuse, you know, sexual violence against children and adolescents, that broad umbrella where child sexual abuse is part of that, was really always approached from a human rights perspective, which is really important and essential. But bringing that public health lens to it was kind of new, especially in terms of global work. And so really this model is data, evidence, advocacy to drive action. And I want to tell you a little bit more first about the data piece. Really the power of data and evidence to share and show the magnitude of the problem. And those of you, of course, that have been working on these issues for a long time, you'll remember that, I think it was like 30, 40 years ago, the American Psychological Association, I remember this article where they were talking about incest and the fact that, 1 in 1 million cases were real when it came to incest. And since then, we've come a long way to understand that actually it's a lot more prevalent than that. But for a long time, there was this sense, not only in the US, but around the world, that child sexual abuse was very rare. And that it really wasn't happening. And other forms of sexual violence against children and adolescents as well, like sexual violence in dating relationships, really something seen as not very common. And over again, we find that when you actually go in and study it, it's of course happening a lot more than anyone anticipates. And that can be a really powerful way of shaping the minds of decision makers, policymakers, and others that have power to create change. We are currently working in 23 countries at this point. The Violence Against Children and Youth Surveys, the VACS, which of course Jesse led for many years, are these surveys led by CDC as part of our broader partnership. We now have data through the VACS for over 10% of the world's population under 24 on these issues. It is the single largest data repository globally on issues of violence against children, adolescents, and youth, including sexual violence and child sexual abuse. And this just gives you a sense of the countries we're working in. A really exciting piece is that, we now have better data and more comprehensive data for like Kenya than we have for the US. And so the CDC is now piloting the VACS in the city of Baltimore. We were able to get some funding through the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation to pilot it in Baltimore. That's going to happen in the fall of this year. And our hope is that by showing what kinds of really comprehensive information you can get with a survey like this at a population level, that can help drive more and more states, cities to actually start doing this kind of survey. I can talk more about that later if you want. Just a snippet of, these are big, large, comprehensive population-based surveys. There is a lot of information that comes from them. But just to give you a snapshot, this shows the percentage of females and males that have experienced some form of sexual violence before the age of 18 at a country level, at a population level. And to note, you'll notice Eswatini is the only one where we only have data for girls. After that, we decided what a missed opportunity not to actually also survey boys. And we're really blown away by the high levels of child sexual abuse and sexual violence that boys experience, albeit usually smaller than girls. You can see here, every country is a little different, but this trend maintains where you have, 3 to 5 times more girls experiencing sexual violence in childhood than boys, but still unacceptably large numbers. So we actually have, even though the name is Together for Girls, a ton of work now that we're doing with boys. But, when you look at this and you see that, I don't know, in a place like Rwanda, a quarter of our girls have experienced some form of sexual violence before the age of 18. It's really mind blowing. And again, we're in this measure putting together child sexual abuse as well as sexual violence experience, for example, in dating relationships, because we kind of look at the sexual violence umbrella at large for children and adolescents. Girls are at risk for sexual violence throughout childhood and adolescence, so we can really look at like age breakouts. And here you can see the gray is the percentage that experienced sexual violence before the age of 13. The kind of pink is between that 14 to 15-year-old range, and then the blue is a little bit older, up to 18. But you can really see, again, variations, but a lot of this violence is starting so early. And then adolescence really becomes a place of heightened risk for girls in so many ways, both for IPV and dating relationships, but other forms of sexual violence as well. Another important thing we find, and of course this will be no surprise to you, is that, large percentages, I mean, this is for girls. We also have data for boys. We estimate that about half of girls ever tell someone about the experience they had, whether it's a friend, a close adult, someone in their circle. So half actually never even talk about the experience. And then a much smaller number actually seek services, and even fewer receive services. So this cascade of the experience, and then if you go all the way to the end to actually getting services, every country we find this over and over again. So if all you're looking at is numbers for those who are seeking services, who end up in a child protection system or seeking some kind of service, it could be anything: health, law, justice, health, any kind of service, really, it's only the tip of the iceberg. That's why this population level survey and data is so important, because then you're really understanding the magnitude of the problem. And for boys, all of these numbers are cut in about half. And so there's a lot that we have to do at every level here in terms of our work. We also look at consequences of violence, everything from HIV infection to unintended pregnancy, school dropout, substance abuse, mental health. We could, there's so much here in terms of the survey and what we're able to capture and the consequences. We know that these issues are associated with so many of the health issues that we care deeply about, and really showing those associations is one of the powerful things this survey does that we haven't been able to really showcase in the US. Just to give you an example, this is a slide on sexual violence and mental health and suicide ideation. And you can really see for girls, the difference between suicide ideation for those who experience sexual violence in childhood and those who haven't. I mean, it's just mind-boggling in terms of what a driver it is for something like suicide ideation. Anyway, a little more, so that was kind of the survey piece in terms of understanding the problem. So there's a lot more I can say there in terms of how we understand the problem from a public health perspective. Then there's a lot of work that we're doing around the data and the evidence on how do you solve this problem? How do you respond to this problem? And I just wanted to show you here this ecological model that we've been developing around how we think of sexual violence against children and adolescents. And really, the various types of victimization that can happen, then the relationship to the perpetrator, whether it's a family member, a stranger. There's a lot, like in Central America, we did a lot of work around understanding this relationship within gangs and gang violence, people of authority. If you go into the setting, we find that this sexual violence is happening in all of these settings, within care systems, justice systems, travel and tourism, religious organizations, sports, within the neighborhood. Online is another huge piece that's exploding, workplace for adolescents and young people, school and the home, of course. And so really trying to expand our understanding, because what we're finding is that all of these multiple forms of sexual violence interact, and oftentimes a single child or adolescent is experiencing multiple forms in different settings. But we usually, as a field, have been very focused on like one setting or one type, and we're not really looking at that whole picture, which is really important. And then, of course, the context, everything from crisis and emergency to armed conflict to issues of, socioeconomic development, migration, etc. So one of the things we did together with the World Health Organization, CDC, UNICEF, and many other global organizations is really sit down and look at all the evidence from around the world on what works to prevent violence against children. So we started looking at violence against children more broadly and really saying, okay, what has worked? What is the evidence? What has been studied? And we came up with this idea of INSPIRE, where each letter of INSPIRE you can see here is a strategy. So there are a series of interventions that fall into the category of implementation and enforcement of laws. There are a series of categories that fall into norms and values, safe environments, parent and caregiver support, income and economic strengthening, um, response and support services, and education and life skills. And then we took that same framework that we used for violence against children in large and dug deeper into the issue of sexual violence against children and adolescents. And I want to take this opportunity to highlight that outside of laws and law enforcement, there are 6 other strategies. And in this country, as we're having this very important reckoning with law enforcement and really the ways in which law enforcement is broken in terms of dealing with these issues, I think it's really important to highlight all the other things that we know work to address this problem, and that I think we pay very little attention to in the US when we're thinking about this issue, especially when it comes to prevention. Um, so anyway, there's a whole website on this, and you can look at Inspire at large. I do want to tell you a little bit more about this kind of deeper dive with Inspire around sexual violence. So this resource is really as a roadmap for decision makers, advocates, implementers, again, to highlight what we know. Because a lot of times, I'm sure you find this in your work, I find that people have this attitude of like, oh my God, this is terrible, but there's not much we can do about it. And that is not true. We know there is actually a lot of evidence from around the world. We need more research for sure, but there's enough here to act. So just as some examples, I wanted to show you for each of these, we categorize the interventions as either effective. So there's a lot of data. There's promising, which means there's some studies and we should continue to implement and study. Prudent, which is, we don't necessarily have a randomized controlled trial, but there's enough gray literature and experts that think it's important that we should be doing it. Conflicting, which is actually, there's studies going both ways. And then harmful, which is also important. There are things people do that are actually harmful. So just as an example, under implementation and enforcement of laws, we found that laws that mandate reporting, for example, of sexual violence against children by designated professionals. So, laws, you're all familiar with this, for mandated reporting. There are not good randomized controlled trials to show that they work, but for early childhood and childhood, we are recommending that as prudent. We think it's helpful. It's an important thing to have. For adolescents, especially late adolescents, there's a lot of conflicting literature on this and studies that show that, for example, for 17-year-olds, if they're having sexual intercourse like with a 19-year-old, and the law says that, that is sexual violence because it's under 18, that 17-year-old is much less likely to then seek sexual reproductive health care services if there's going to be mandated reporting. So it's you got to think about it for late adolescents. This is just an example. In India, for example, there was a law that said any sex with anyone under 18, with anyone over 18 is a crime. And we saw significant drops in, teenagers who were sexually active, seeking services. And that was a huge problem, as an example. Norms and values, there's quite a lot of evidence around community mobilization programs to change attitudes, norms, and behaviors with intervention at community level from around the world. There's some examples here, but really effective. It's, and Jesse, you'll remember Sasa and some of the work that we've done on this. It's just phenomenal, the impact on reporting and actually sexual violence when you're working with norms at a community level. There's some promising approaches. I'm sure you might be familiar with some of these, like engaging men and boys, and some studies that have been shown to be effective here in the US as well as around the world, but we're categorizing it as promising because there's not the high level of evidence that we have for others. And again, these are just examples. If you're interested, you could look at the resource. There's more under each of these. For safe environments, there's quite a lot of, gray literature and experts talking about the issue of policies and practices, for example, in schools, and really creating safe environments within schools and the ability to kind of decrease sexual violence happening in those settings. Safeguarding policies, so important. Again, there's a lot of literature on safeguarding for kids. I know the CDC is now undergoing an extensive review of safeguarding guidelines for the US, but we're categorizing this as prudent, and there's quite a lot of, I think, additional research that's needed around, like randomized controlled trials, and really, two organizations, one has it, one doesn't, and what's the impact on that. But we are categorizing that as prudent, as well as all the work around awareness raising for online child sexual exploitation and abuse that I'm sure you're aware was already on the rise. And with COVID, with the amount of kids that are just online every day, it's just exploding in ways that are hard to fathom. I can talk more about that if you want to. Parent and caregiver support, quite a lot of research again here around how do you engage parents, parent-child communication, and the role that parents can play in terms of protecting kids. Education and life skills, there's quite a lot of work. I mean, I'm sure you're familiar with like Safe Dates and all the school-based safe dating programs. Those have been found to be quite effective in preventing dating violence, sexual violence in dating relationships. Empowerment and self-defense training has been studied significantly, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, and quite a lot of exciting evidence coming out there in terms of reductions in sexual violence for especially adolescent girls, early and late adolescence. And then all this work around education and awareness raising for adults. I'm sure you're familiar with Darkness to Light and the kind of training they do for adults. We have categorized as prudent. We feel like there's more studies that are needed to really show the effectiveness in preventing child sexual abuse, but we have categorized it as prudent and is something that makes sense to continue to do. So just to wrap up on this piece, some of the implications of the study, of all the research we did globally, is really that we found that national response or state level response integrated into broader protection systems is really important. Programs that are holistic and address multiple factors with norms and behaviors are really the most effective. Programs that are developmentally appropriate and age and gender specific. So not just grouping children into a big lump, but saying, early childhood, early adolescence, late adolescence, really understanding that, as well as gender issues. And programs that target children and delivered over several sessions and that are participatory also seem to be more effective. We have I encourage you to go to our website. We have this study as well as a lot of other resources and a lot of details about all of this in the big campaign we've done around sexual violence solutions that has been quite successful over the last year. Really excited to see the level of engagement we've had there, including as part of something called the Survivors Agenda that we engaged in here in the US last year. Now I want to transition a little bit and move towards this advocacy piece. So that was my data and evidence. Now I'm going to go to that advocacy piece. One of the things we've found through our work, and I want to hear a little bit from you, but I'm sure you've experienced this too, is data and evidence is really important and powerful to say there's a problem, here are the solutions to inform action, but it's not sufficient. It is important, it's necessary, but not sufficient. Advocacy, stories, really, how do you make noise and push on this issue? All that is really important. And we like to think of it as data for humans is always numbers with stories. Decision makers, policy makers, you can show them a bunch of graphs. It doesn't quite compute, but stories have the power to move us into action, because that's just, how our brain is hardwired. I'm actually a psychologist by training. So this is always fascinating to me about the intersection between stories and numbers. And to illustrate that, I want to share with you a little bit the power of data and stories by telling you a little bit about my own story. So as Jessie mentioned, I am a survivor. I'm a survivor of child sexual abuse. I started being sexually abused at the age of 6. This is a picture of me at the age of 6, by someone close to my family, and that lasted for several years. And like most kids who are abused, I lived in silence, shame, and a lot of fear. And eventually, I was about 15 and we were on vacation with my parents. We were in Disney World of all places. And I didn't feel very well. So I stayed alone at the hotel and I watched this movie. It's called Something About Amelia. You might know it. And it was about a young girl who had been sexually abused and the implications and the consequences in her life. And it just rocked my world because for the first time, I was like, oh, like I could make sense of what I had experienced. And um, all of a sudden, I didn't feel alone. I felt like, oh, this is something that others have gone through. And, my parents came back and I was able to tell them what had happened. And it started a series of events that really changed my life where I was very fortunate. I always say I'm very fortunate. I had access to a lot of mental health services, support. Um, and I've been on this, 30 plus healing journey that has led me here today and to do the work that I do. Um, but, I feel like, I've made a decision that I want to make sure that what happened to me doesn't happen to others and to use my voice to create change. And so I'm sharing that story with you because I believe that those are the stories that help people that make decisions know that all those numbers I showed you before are not just data points. They are children, they are people. And each one of them has a story behind them. And so I also believe that the kind of advocacy that we need to really change this issue is going to be grounded in the power of survivors and allies coming together to create the change that we need. Um, and one of the things that I'm really excited about is there's a whole piece of work now around our advocacy that's really centered on survivor voices, elevating those voices, and connecting survivors and allies to demand and create, really action and political change. And so, really, our message and what we've been building out, especially over the last years, this idea that survivor voices are essential, that we are resourceful, we're resilient, we're ready. There are so many survivors out there already advocating and creating change. Me Too has been amazing to just see the explosion of people coming together to focus on sexual violence. But we believe that there is a need to do more when it comes to the issue of child sexual abuse. And this kind of leads me a little bit to the work that we're doing in the US. In addition to the Vax in Baltimore, last year we were able to create an alliance, and partly because I've just been watching the advocacy in the US on the issue of child sexual abuse. It is, especially at federal level, it is so fractured. Each organization does their own thing. We're not coming together to speak with one voice to really demand the kind of systemic change that's needed. And so we created this Keep Kids Safe Alliance focused on prevention, healing, and justice. That is our framework to end sexual violence against children and adolescents. We believe each of those three pieces is needed. And different folks will play a different part in each of those. We have brought together some of the largest organizations that work on this issue: RAIN, National Children's Alliance, Darkness to Light, Child USA, Monique Burr Foundation, Prevent Child Abuse America, as well as survivor groups like the Army of Survivors. I don't know if you're aware of them, but they're this phenomenal group that is focused on child sexual abuse and sexual violence in sport. And they were started by the survivors of the Larry Nassar scandal, the doctor that abused the US gymnasts. They're phenomenal. SNAP, of course, which is for survivors of sexual abuse within religious organizations. And we're continuing to grow the alliance. We're really excited that more and more members want to join and really take action on this issue of sexual violence against children and adolescents. We did quite a lot of advocating last year to make sure that COVID relief paid attention to child sexual abuse. We were delighted to see that the new package that was recently approved does include some of our asks around funding for prevention, healing, and justice for child sexual abuse, which is really exciting. We are now working on advocating for Oh, sorry, this is the COVID one. We were able to get over 340 signatories, survivors, and organizations, and we keep talking about a movement of survivors and allies is what we're trying to mobilize nationally. And again, we're somewhat successful at getting, we didn't get everything we wanted, but we got a lot of what we wanted, which is great in the relief package. And now we're really transitioning to demand from new Congress and new administration, really elevating the ambition and demanding, comprehensive executive and congressional action on the issue of child sexual abuse. And one of our requests, there's this letter that's circulating. It's going to circulate for the entire month of April. I encourage you to go in and sign on if you haven't yet. It's something you can do. I know Jesse helped us distribute it to a few folks, which was great, Jesse. And I don't know if you saw, but one of the things we were asking for is we decided to do the first ever in the US day on April 8th of child sexual abuse prevention, healing, and justice. And it was an amazing success. All of the organizations did events that day, and we got the White House to actually acknowledge the day on April 8th. And it's a day. And so from now on, April 8th is going to be Child Sexual Abuse Prevention, Healing, and Justice Day in the US. And now we are moving to work with the UN on a resolution to actually make it a global day, which is also very exciting. And the vision is that next April 8th, we're going to have 1,000 times what we did this year in terms of really raising awareness around this issue and showcasing what needs to change. So right now we are working to build the legislation that's really comprehensive, that pulls lots of different pieces from these, again, little asks that were here and there into a comprehensive framework for prevention, healing, and justice for child sexual abuse in the US, as well as in terms of our foreign assistance. Very exciting. This I just wanted to share with you. Oh no, my slide is messed up. Is a ton of resources that we've developed. I'm sure you're aware of these, but maybe not. And we can circulate the slides. Each of these is a hyperlink. So there's a whole set of resources that we've developed with our global partners around COVID-19 parenting. And it includes a module on child sexual abuse and sexual violence online, but also a lot of other, just issues around parenting. It's been so hard to be a good parent during the last year, and with so many families, with all the stress that they're experiencing economically, as well as, with lockdowns in the US, this amazing moment that we're living in terms of reckoning with our, with racial justice that's been that has been building and is finally here. I mean, there's just so much, but these parenting resources have now reached over 30 million parents around the world. It's really exciting. And there are a couple of other resources here that might be helpful for you. Some of them you'll know, like Darkness to Lights training, but others like what to say when a friend or family member shares they've had sexual violence experience is something we actually worked on and developed. Anyway, I'm going to stop there because I've talked a lot, and I'm going to, that is, I think, the end of my, oh no, I need my quote. Sorry. I must do my quote. So anyway, I want to look forward to the conversation with you. And I always like to end with this. It's an inspiration to me that, we should never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. It's the only thing that ever has. And I know that you all are out there day in and day out trying to change the world. And so I'm really honored to be with you here today as we do that together. All right. Oh, stop share. Okay. I'm opening it up, Jesse. Over to you.
Thanks, Daniela. That was amazing. As always, you never cease to amaze me. Thank you so much for being with us today and for sharing all of that. I wanted to mostly just kind of create space for all of you to ask Daniela questions. She is a wealth of information, as you can tell. And I think one of the things that I was hoping for bringing her into to our space is to be able to really think about ways that we can take some of what has been learned both globally and what's being done, some of the work that Daniela described, but with Keep Kids Safe and other work being done in the US, that we can start thinking about what are we not doing in Connecticut that we could start taking and drawing from in all of this. So I'd love to hear from all of you in terms of just thoughts. I could put you into groups, but we're not that large of a group, so I thought it'd be nice to just stay together. And feel free to ask Daniela questions. We have her for a little bit longer, so I think ask away, jump in, or put stuff in the chat, either way. Marissa, I will put the website.
Good morning. My name is Marcia Roman. I work for the Women and Family Center. I was wondering, oh, and thank you, by the way, Daniela, that was really awesome, all that information that you brought to us. I was just wondering, is there more work being done on what we were doing before with the alliance with men and boys and men, all that information to how to have, I guess, a different mindset about female abuse, whether it be a young woman or a child. I know it was Men Against Violence, I think it was called. Are we still doing that? Because I know for a while we were bringing that out. As a matter of fact, we had a young man that was working with Chrysalis and bringing all that to the young boys in different organizations. But I know that they're not doing it anymore. So I was just wondering, because I think some boys need to hear about, maybe like in middle school, start doing it, so then maybe there won't be a different mindset by the time they get to high school about, sexual violence, because there's so much sexual violence in high schools and also college and stuff. But I think some of it is because they're getting the wrong messages at home or with their peers. So maybe if we kind of brought out a different perspective on what violence is for young women, they have a mindset and it's a different way of thinking, that they think it's okay, to have, like in colleges or in high schools, that they do group sex and all kinds of stuff, and or boys, they put something on the drinks for the girls, not even thinking twice about the damage that they're doing. So I was just wondering if you had any, if we were continuing doing that, or is it we're not doing that anymore?
That's a good question. I know, thanks, Marcia, for your question. I think there was a lot of work, I think, a couple years back that got started with coaching boys into men in Connecticut. And so I know there was like a big push originally. My understanding is that it's still being done a little bit. And I think it mostly, if I'm correct, and I could be incorrect, and if anyone else from the Alliance it's on, feel free to jump in if you know better than I do. As when I came in July of last year to my position, it seems like things had died down a little bit. And I think it was mostly pandemic related. And I don't know if since then there has been much in the way of the different groups that were starting to do it, if they started picking things back up. As we are, hiring to replace Elise, who many of you know left her training and technical assistance position, we're really trying to kind of make sure that the prevention piece of that position is going to be a strong focus moving forward. So please come to your upcoming, advocacy meetings and your monthly meetings, your bilingual advocate meeting, whatever groups you're in, community educator meetings, with these ideas of things that you want to see in the state moving forward. I would love for us to do more drawing from documents like Inspire and other things that CDC has some strong technical packages that really draw off the same literature that Daniela spoke of around evidence-based strategies that we can build off of and adapt in Connecticut. So I think those are really important for you to highlight based on what you know in your communities. And we as an Alliance can work to support that across the state.
Yeah, and Jesse, just to add, Marcia, I think it's such an important point. One of the things I wanted to make sure to do is to name the fact we often don't. We talk about sexual violence and against someone like children, adolescents, women. And, I think as a field beginning to also name the fact that we're talking about men's violence against women and children primarily. Women, it's important to know women can also sexually abuse, yes. Women also perpetrate sexual violence. That is absolutely true and important to acknowledge. And so we need to hold two truths, that happens and that the majority of it is perpetrated by men and boys. and perpetration starts early in adolescence. And so, you know, I think the importance of working with men and boys is there. We can't ignore that. And the earlier we start, the more successful we are. So I think those kinds of interventions, I'm glad to hear, Jesse, that there's some work happening in Connecticut. I think it is really important to work with boys, to start young, to change norms, to have conversations about consent. And the other thing we find is that one of the main factors that predicts men's violence against women and girls is having had that experience as a child. And so we also need to protect boys from violence because it is a way of interrupting cycles of violence as well. So I think those two things are important. Anyway.
Not even jump in?
Yeah. So I don't know if I have like messy thoughts in my brain. But I'm often thinking about why we gender victims and survivors. I understand when it comes to intervention, and I understand for like data purposes and all of that. But when I see the stats of, usually when we collect stats around sexual violence with young people or any age, we say like, oh, girls have been assaulted like 1 out of 4 times or whatever it is. And then it's almost as an afterthought that we think about boys. And then we also know that boys don't report in the same way. So in the stats that you showed, like some of those countries are like neck and neck with boys and girls. And then like the slide after was saying that boys report half as many times or something like that. So I guess I just wanted to know what your thoughts were around why we gender in these ways, especially if we're trying to like break our ideas of like gender binaries and understanding that.
That's an awesome question. And I think we are evolving as a field. And I think we need more and more people to kind of push on these ideas. So, for us, the evolution as a partnership has been fascinating, from just looking at girls to then also looking at boys. We have a whole work. I mean, the name's just not going to change. I tried. No one wants to change the name. So we have a whole nother piece of work called Together for Girls for Boys. We have added questions more recently to our surveys around gender identity, sexual orientation, and of course, we can see levels of violence, as you would imagine, that are like through the rooftops for, especially like in Central America. I think we found is the highest homicide rate in the entire world anywhere is in Central America around transgender individuals. I mean, and so I think the gendered conversation needs to evolve. I think there is value. In my field, what I see a lot of times is people just group children and they lump them together. And I think there is a value in understanding the differentiated experiences of boys, girls, gender non-binary. Like we start to expand that, because we need to understand, is that experience, what is the same about the experience? What is different about the experience? Like understanding that boys report less than girls is important, because I think that's tied into all the stigma around how we define masculinity. And for boys, it's even harder than for girls to say, someone sexually abused me. So I think there is a value. And I also think, to your really good point, like we need to also be kind of move beyond that in our thinking and begin to understand how, in a way, we also start to box people in, and how we can be more fluid in terms of our thinking around some of these issues. I don't know if that's an answer. It's a good conversation to have,
I agree. And I just want to jump in with a couple other thoughts, which are consistent, I think, with Daniela's. But I think one of the things that happened early on, Daniela mentioned that the very first vax that was done in Swaziland at the time, Eswatini now, was done only with girls. And I think what happens is that there oftentimes are these assumptions. If we only look at child sexual abuse and we talk about disaggregating or separating out data by gender or by sex, or however the questions are framed, we don't get a real picture of what's going on, right? And so in Swaziland originally, when they were thinking about it, they thought it was really just a problem with the girls. And it really left this huge gap in the data and understanding and the ability to provide adequate services and even understand what was going on for boys, right? And so I think that's the other piece too, is if we don't start looking at it, then you can just look at child sexual abuse and a lot of people will assume that we're only talking about girls, right? So then we don't even get to what is going on with boys and what is the context that is specific to the experiences of those boys. And the other piece I think that's really important that we looked at with some other kind of work that Daniela and I kind of worked on together with the HIV related work was that trying to understand HIV transmission and what that looks like and how that's different for boys and girls, transgender individuals, with regards to the violence they experience and the HIV, and how important that was to start looking at those data that way. When they were looking at data, just grouping everyone together, resources were just poured in and however people wanted to use them, right? And so then resources were poorly used. They weren't being used to direct services or think about programming in towards specific groups that really had greater need. And so I think there's some of that too. And I agree that it's a bigger and really important conversation that we need to think about. But I think that's some of the reasoning behind why it's been done the ways that it's done in the past. Larissa, I saw your hand.
Thank you.
Yeah.
First, let me say thank you so much, Daniela, for sharing your story. I am going to try to get through my thought without becoming emotional because I've been having a really tough time since last night with some information that I received. I am also a survivor, a third generation survivor at that. My grandmother, myself, my mom was sexually abused by my grandfather. And I have since, in recent years, like I didn't talk about it. And in 2013 was when I officially started talking about it and got thrust into the work that I am doing now after traveling back and forth to Jamaica. I am Jamaican. And going back and forth to court there to bring charges against him, and then realizing the magnitude of what was really happening on that island. And as a result of that, I started Journey to Free, and this is where I go back home annually, and we do these retreats with these young girls, and now opening this up as well for boys and talking to them as well. My question to you, because I'm so thankful I got the opportunity to be here today, because just last night it was on the news in Jamaica that they had a report of 357 girls that came in recently and reported of the 50 of the 357, 57 of them were impregnated by their abusers, and all of these girls had been raped. And so the question now, I mean, this is all over the news. We've known for years now that this is just beyond the levels of reporting to the authorities there, is not really being reported. It's minute to the amount of girls and boys as well that are being victimized on the island. So my question to you, while I have so many questions, is what is the criteria for all of this for the countries to be chosen that was on the list, and how would we get some partnership or just learn more about the work that you're doing and all of that, and Jamaica be included in that? Because I have been trying to do this. I know there's some organization that goes, and I also do work here as well in Connecticut with the Greater Hartford Family Advocacy Center. I volunteer with them, and majority of the work we do also is around child sexual abuse prevention. But again, being from that country, my heart is there as well. And knowing how much we're lacking in resources and getting everyone on board to really fight this cause, and seeing so many countries listed on the chart that you showed earlier, I just wanted to know, how does that happen where the countries get chosen? And additionally, how could you share your contact information?
Yeah, so first of all, Larissa, thank you for sharing your own personal story. I know the cost that comes with that, and the power then for other girls to look up to you and to have the courage to then do that as well. So thank you for that and your courage. Um, yeah, so there are a lot of factors that go into the work. Jesse knows this well. It's a mixture and a combination of like opportunity with, there's the funding issue, there's the interest. One of the things that is really essential for this work is the government needs to want to do it. This idea of government leadership, local ownership is so important because, in the world of international development, there's a very kind of imperialistic tradition of, actors from, rich countries going down to developing countries and saying, this is what we're doing, and that is not how we work. It's about really empowering, governments, leaders in these countries. And so they have to want it, and there has to be a request, as well as some funding to support the work. And, in every country, it looks a little different. The good news about Jamaica is that we're actually in discussions with Jamaica. We started these discussions about 2 years ago. The Ministry of Health had reached out, and there was some interest, and we weren't really able to advance the conversations. But right now we are again having conversations with them and trying to figure out the funding piece, which is the challenge, and actively trying to secure funds to perhaps do some work in Jamaica. So it actually could, it's interesting that there are only 2 or 3 countries where we're having active conversations right now, and Jamaica is one of them. So there you go. So let's absolutely keep in touch. I'm happy to share my information with you, and also to put you in touch with my colleague, Begonia Fernandez, who is the lead for the region. And so you can continue to stay in touch and to hear more about the work that you're doing there as well.
I would really appreciate that. Thank you so much. Oh my gosh, I could cry, but I am so ecstatic right now. And yes, I am happy that Jamaica is being considered because, as I mentioned before, being Jamaican, knowing what my experience was and is, and having so many just family members alone that have gone through this and have this experience, and now being awaken to the fact that this is happening so prevalently on the island. It's heartrending. And I know my doing this part, doing my work, it's just a drop in the bucket, and wanting to expand this on such a massive level, but not really knowing where to turn. So I am really, really happy for this. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Hello. So I actually have 2 questions, and they kind of came to me as I'm thinking about the clients that I'm currently serving. By the way, my name is Sarah, and I am the bilingual counselor at the Rowan Center. So my first question was, you briefly mentioned that there is an organization that is creating prevention or starting a prevention journey for religious organizations. And I was wondering if there are, what that might be like, and also like if there's any actions going on right now to kind of start the prosecution of perpetrators who are religious leaders, and how they are being protected by the religious organization as a whole, and on a global level, if there's anything like that going on right now.
Yes, Sarah, good questions. It's the issue of institutional abuse and cover-up is such an important one. And I think, to the points I think that many others have made in their questions, and including Larissa recently with what she was talking about, this tip of the iceberg. Like, there is so much that's happening underneath that we don't necessarily see, because these are people that never show up, to press charges, to seek services that our child protection systems, don't identify. And one such place is religious organizations, as per that graph I showed at the beginning. I mean, sport is one, school, believe me, is another. But, you know, within religious organizations, it's especially challenging because we know from the data it happens across every religion. I mean, this isn't an issue. Here we've seen quite a lot of scandals in the Catholic Church, but I always like to make sure people understand it isn't a Catholic issue. You know, it's happening in every religious organization. It's just that, you know, we've had a few more scandals here and across the world that show that. But I do think that's where the state is really important. And I think in Connecticut, the ability to really, you know, Child USA, one of our partners in Keep Kids Safe, does quite a lot of work with SNAP. And I don't know if you're familiar with SNAP, the Survivors Network for those abused by priests. I would definitely, if you have some clients that are dealing with this issue, they are a fantastic national organization. They also have chapters in other countries. They have resources for survivors, fact sheets, a lot of information about some of the issues that you were raising around kind of steps, et cetera. But at the end of the day, in the US, it really comes down to state law. And the, you know, Child USA with SNAP have been working to change laws in certain states because every state is different. I don't know the law in Connecticut around, you know, whether you can bring charges against a religious organization because there's some protections there. And so it would be important, I think, to do a little more digging to find out what is the law in Connecticut. I would go to SNAP and Child USA, and they have resources. I think Child USA even has a mapping of the states and what the laws are to really, you know, A, figure out what you're going to do with your clients, and B, perhaps for everyone, what are the laws that need to change in Connecticut so that you're really protecting victims.
Great, thank you so much. And then my second question, it's somewhat related to that, but more on the like non-sterile, non-organized organizations. So for example, clients being sexually abused by their coyotes as they're crossing the border. Is there any?
You cut out the sexual abuse when?
Yeah, but by coyotes.
Ah, yes, yes.
They're crossing the border. And I was just wondering if there's any specific resources for those who have suffered that.
Yeah, so I think, you know, that's another issue. You know, that's why that framework, I keep going back to, like, really understanding the various contexts in which sexual violence and child sexual abuse happens, and migration is definitely one of them. There's quite a lot of data to show that on the migration journey, there's so many opportunities for abuse that happen. Whether it's coyotes at the border or UN peacekeepers in the Democratic Republic of Congo. I mean, it's, or Haiti, you know, it's like, that's definitely an issue. In terms of resources, I know that, I don't know in Connecticut specifically, but I know that there's an organization called Casa Esperanza where they do quite a lot of work with here. And I know that they have around the US affiliates where they actually do quite a lot of work with sexual violence survivors who have come, especially from Central America in the US. And so that might be a good place to look. And there are a lot of, and all of their resources are bilingual, which is, I think, also very helpful in Spanish and English. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much.
Sure.
Others? Notes? And here.
Can I ask you like a question, maybe, if we have a little bit of time? So what do you all feel in terms of kind of this opportunity to mobilize and like this movement building piece? I mean, we're trying to do that at federal level, but at state level, you know, are there groups of advocates really working on the issue of child sexual abuse? Like, what does that look like? Are there opportunities to strengthen those alliances at state level? Anyway, I would love to just hear a little bit more about that.
Does anyone want to jump in? I can talk about some of what I know, but many of you who work in the member centers have probably more information on a local level of what you all are doing from an advocacy perspective. But I can share, and any of you who are part of our conversation yesterday, feel free to jump in. So some of what's been going on, Daniela, is we have some strong local, state reps who have been trying to push through new legislation. There's kind of like a package of different bills that the Committee on Children has been trying to push through. And we had the chair of that committee, her name is Liz Linehan, on a panel yesterday when we were talking about and viewing resilience documentary. And so there's been some work there that's been a little bit around. I think there's been some advocacy garnered through some of her work, as well as through some other efforts that that have been kind of led by, there's an arm of Prevent Child Abuse America here. So there's Prevent Child Abuse Connecticut that they've been doing some work. And then the Connecticut Children's Alliance focus on and really are kind of the lead for all the child advocacy centers around Connecticut. So I think there's been some work through Prevent Child Abuse Connecticut to kind of pull people together in a little bit more of a kind of cohesive way. And it sort of feels like we only recently joined them. So I think from my perspective, it feels new-ish, like this kind of pulling together from various sectors. But this is a conversation I think we've been trying to have over the course of this month, is like, who are all the sectors that need to be involved that haven't been involved? And how do we kind of get everyone together to be a more powerful voice, right, for this work, for the data piece, for the prevention piece, so all these different components I think are really critical. But it doesn't mean that the work isn't being done to some extent. I think, like you were talking about, it's fairly fractured, like we see all the time in addressing this issue, I think. So I think that there's more going on. I'd love to hear from folks that have been working in Connecticut much longer than I have on this issue, to hear what your perspectives are in terms of that work. Larissa, do you want to jump in?
Yes, I just wanted to say, I have to agree with you, Jesse, on that bit and what Daniela referred to before about, the systems just being fractured and all the different systems, all the different groups, organization are not working as cohesively as they could possibly work. Because from a personal standpoint, I have been in this country for over 20 years. And it wasn't until recently that I even knew there was a Connecticut Alliance to end sexual abuse. I learned all of this only because I started opening my mouth and advocating here as well. And at an event that I did where I was asked to speak, that's when I found out about all the different organizations and all the different groups and advocates that's working. And that was just a small percentage of people that I spoke to in that setting. And now being able to learn about these different groups and just finding out that there is so much lacking. There's still so much work that needs to be done, and people need to come together and pull together. And as you rightly said, it's finding out all the different groups and everyone coming from the prevention pieces, from the data collecting pieces, everything that you just said. It's just a matter of getting everyone under the same umbrella, because it's just too far-fetched and too separate. And so people just don't know about these organizations, and I think that's a major deal. I know for the Greater Hartford Family Advocacy Center that I am currently volunteering with, again, it just happened to be a situation where I had to start doing some research for a survivor that I came across. And they reached out to me through my YouTube channel, and I had to go in to start researching to see what resources were out there. And that's how I ended up finding out some of this information as well. But it's just too far-fetched. It needs to be more cohesive.
And I think that's probably true everywhere, right, Larissa? I mean, it's so interesting to hear, over and over again, that same story. Jesse, if you wouldn't mind sending me, you said there's a package of bills that someone was talking about yesterday. I'd love to see that. I mean, one of the things we're exploring is, we've created this national alliance but we're exploring whether we want to start to encourage state level Keep Kids Safe alliances.
Yeah.
Again, survivors, allies coming together around specifically this issue. So that's kind of the next step in generation for us, is to really create mechanisms so that state level actors can organize themselves around, this Keep Kids Safe, I hate calling it a brand or whatever it is, framework of prevention, healing, and justice that focuses on, survivors and allies coming together to end sexual violence against children and adolescents. Anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll try that. Thanks, Malin. She's saying that the Rowan Center, they're very present in almost every school in the 8 towns they serve, educating students about sexual violence with appropriate language for each grade. That's great.
That's great. I think the school piece, can I just make a quick comment on that? And then I do have to run. The school piece is so important. And one of the things we're working on is in terms of federal legislation that incentivizes states to actually make sure every single school has this, versus it's such a patchwork right now. Some schools decide, some counties say want to do it, some don't. And to really have that be across the board, like this needs to be part of a child's education. Anyway, just
yeah, and I think Sherry had put in the comments a little bit earlier that there is legislation here that was passed. I think I want to say 2016 or 2017, right around then. But there's been there wasn't money attached to the legislation, and there's no accountability for it, so schools can kind of do whatever they want, and it hasn't. Right. Nothing has been amended in terms of fixing that. So I agree that is incredibly problematic, and we need to find a way to work on that piece of it. Yeah, Sunny.
I'm sorry.
Can I just, ahead, please?
One of the things that I wanted to discuss is all of us women are doing a wonderful job, and Lynn Lanahan, who was on yesterday, she's pushing for things in Connecticut. But I think we have to also make sure that we focus our efforts and advocacy to some of the male representatives also, because I think sometimes the legislatures and stuff are more likely to listen to them than to some of the women. And I think that's just an important thing to keep them in mind, that we need to focus to get them to promote these issues also.
It's a great point. Absolutely. This is not, looks like they're mostly women on this call, but it is not a women's issue, and we need to get the men to lead on it, right? To lead on it. Yeah.
Sure. Neil, I know you need to go. Yeah. Thank you so much for being with us. I greatly appreciate it. There was some requests about contact information. Do you want to send me at some point what you're comfortable sharing, and I will send it out to this?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. You could share my email, Jesse. I put that, with everyone. And what'll happen is write me, and then I will direct you, depending on your question, to the right person on the team to actually have a follow-up conversation with you.
Great.
If, because I might be able to respond, but for some of these other pieces, like the piece you mentioned, Larissa, Begonia is going to be the better person for you to be talking to.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Daniela. Have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for all that you're doing. I know that it sometimes feels lonely and it feels hard, but it is so important. And I just really want to say how much I appreciate, the leadership and the work. So.
Thank you, everyone. And I'm going to put in a link. Everyone, sorry, if you can take 2 minutes to just fill out our evaluation. It's always super helpful. I've been reading all of them over the past month, and it's super helpful having your feedback. So I'm going to put in a link in just a moment when I can pull it up. Daniela, a million thanks. Wonderful to see you.
Bye.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
I'm putting in the chat right now, folks. If you can copy it, you don't have to do it right this moment, but if you don't mind taking it. And I know that this was cut a little shorter than you probably anticipated, and I apologize. Having Daniela, for the time we had her, I was like, okay, we'll take what we can get. So thank you all for being here. Does anyone have anything else you wanted to add or contribute to the conversation at all? I want this to be an ongoing conversation. I'm hoping that over the past couple of days that we've started talking more and more about the child sexual abuse stuff, that this is going to be an ongoing conversation. Oh, did I say it? Okay, great. And that we will be talking more and more about ideas that we have for bringing more stakeholders and more, different groups and partners together, ways that we can identify new strategies for us as a state, prevention strategies, and how we tailor response in different ways for different populations of children. All those different pieces, I'm hoping us to keep having those conversations. And so please keep coming to us with your ideas, and keep sharing during your monthly meetings with the Alliance and in your peers. All of that information eventually comes back to us as a program team, and we are listening to you. We are trying to figure out new ways to do things. So please keep sending us your ideas and thoughts.
So I just wanted to let you know, I opened the link and it's for the resilience documentary.
Thank you.
Man,
why am I having so much trouble?
Can
with
you
these?
open the? Oh, okay. I also messed up. So
hold on. Let me pull it up. Thank you so much. Hold on. I will pull that back up. I got it. This one should work. Okay, check this one, please. Every other day I've sent it to someone else on the team ahead of time. I didn't send it to Nani to be like, can you check this for me?
I think this one's it. Yeah.
Awesome. Sorry.
Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for being with us this morning. Thanks for joining an early morning session. Have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.